Shall we start? Thank you everybody for sharing your time with us in this cold afternoon in Vancouver and hot and sunny Friday morning in Melbourne, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Great. Well, and special thanks to our panel for their generosity with their time to share their thoughts and expertise with us. Integrating language and communication skills to content-based courses in undergraduate programs is on the agenda of many universities, including SFU. At SFU, we call these types of courses W courses or writing intensive courses. I know in Ontario they call it content-based courses, content-based communication courses, or sometimes referred to as disciplinary academic literacy courses. Anyways, we are here today to discuss with our panel the importance and good methods for designing, delivering, teaching, assessment, and academic integrity of these types of courses. We have with us today Professor Fiona Henderson in the background from Victoria University.
Hi.
So I welcome Dr. Maree Keating, also from Melbourne, Swinburne Institute of Technology. We also have Dr. Ismaeil Fazel, one of our panelists. Yeah, there you go. From UBC. And soon our last panelist will join us in person, Dr. Heng. He's teaching in the Faculty of Education until 3:30, so I'm sure he's running right now. He will be here any minute. Well, thank you very much, everybody. So I'm going to start with the first round of questions. I'm going for one question for each panelist first, and once we finish the first round of questions, we can go to the audience for their questions. And before heading back to the panelists for the second round of questions, again, one question each. And finally, we get back to the audience again for discussion. So if you have any questions, please kind of hold it until the end of round one or round two. Okay, great. Thank you. And you can read all the bios and past expertise in the flyer that was circulated earlier. So let's start with round one questions. And let's start with efficacy first. And so my first question is for Maree here. And let's start with basics first. What is the importance of adding these types of courses to the undergraduate curriculum, Maree?
Hi, everybody. Look, I know that a lot of the people who are here are already quite experienced and very knowledgeable about this question, but I think it's a great question because it gives me a chance to restate the fundamental value of having W courses in the economics curriculum. And I want to start by saying that discipline academics, and I've been one for many years before I was an academic literacy advisor. The ones that we've spoken to in Australia usually believe that their priority is to deliver discipline material, the context, the theory, the current debates, the applied problem solving within their discipline. They don't see it as their job to be teaching academic skills related to their assessments. So the problem with that is that during assessments, students are required to demonstrate to those same academics that the knowledge and understanding they've acquired is at the standard, and they need to do that through written and spoken assessment. So it's obviously not ethical to grade students on skills criteria when those skills aren't being explicitly taught, or where students can't reasonably be expected to pick them up through set activities in class. And even if students come into the class with a with quite highly developed, linguistic and sort of written skills, they may not have the skills for the particular kinds of written and spoken assessments that are being expected of them right from the very beginning of their undergraduate degree, and then scaling up as they go through their degree. So international students in particular, but also many, if not most, domestic students have limited experience when they come into university with writing a case study, a media pitch, incorporating critical theory into an argument, whether it's in an essay or a spoken presentation. So indeed, many students, both international and domestic students, choose these kinds of discipline areas to study because they're not confident with their spoken and written expression. So at first year, most are going to need to learn the conventions of a professional report, where they might just do something simple like summarize a chart or a graph in language. And by second year, they might need to learn conventions for more complex reports, where they're summarising and presenting arguments based on contemporary research. But by third year, they might need to integrate both information from charts and graphs and literature and contemporary debates in their report writing skills. So layered academic skill development needs to take place alongside discipline knowledge. While some students can and do absorb these sorts of spoken and written practices, sort of because they come from highly literate, perhaps family backgrounds, many, if not most, students will struggle or fail to demonstrate that knowledge unless they are explicitly taught the conventions, the linguistic, the stylistic conventions, but also the critical thinking skills conventions, unless these are explicitly taught. So it can be very demoralising for large numbers of clever students to repeatedly do badly in their assessment because of their lack of exposure to the development of those skill sets. And as an academic skills advisor, I hear that all the time. So in short, I think these kinds of courses are really important in universities, particularly now that most universities in English-speaking world are claiming to be delivering work-ready graduates, and that's become a very big agenda for universities. And so in meeting this challenge, it's a very complex challenge to really meet when the majority of your students are from diverse cultural backgrounds and where they're going back to practice at the end of their degree in a culture which might be very different from our particular context that we're teaching in. However, the research certainly in Australia indicates that all students benefit from structured and explicit teaching of academic written and spoken skills that are inherent in the particular professional practices that students are hoping to graduate into. So if we want to deliver work-ready graduates, that working in tandem together between discipline teachers and academic skills teachers is absolutely key.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was great. And this brings us to the second question about good practices for design of these types of courses, and that's for you, Fiona. So, what are some key challenges in design or delivery of content-based academic literacy courses that we are talking about?
Okay, so if you're hi everybody. So Maree and I just happen to be in the one location, even though we're from two different universities. So the designing of a communications course that is for success, for economics, it can cover many elements. And I'm not really going to talk about the issues of timetabling and cost, but they're behind scenes and they're pragmatic things. But I do think aspects like co-teaching need to be well thought through, that there needs to be a lot of respect and cross-referencing to each other. If you're not in each other's space, sometimes it's worthwhile to go into each other's classes because this is strengthening the bonds and strengthening the message that comes from each person, and that there is a physical support as well as a content support of the academic skills as well as the disciplinary content. I think the language is very important that is used, and even things like the title. What do you call this unit? If we call it academic writing for economists, does that make sense? If we call it professional writing, you know, it's very easy to turn students off by the title of a course. And I don't think, you know, just something calling it professional communications necessarily works. Can we hook them in by calling it my future as an economist? Maybe. So that's the title angle. Another angle is what you actually call your session with the students. Is it a lecture? Is it a seminar? Is it a tutorial? Is it a workshop? Now, I know we actually met last week and we talked about that you might call things a lecture, but be able to do anything. But if you ask the students what their expectations are when you call it that, so what we want to break down are the expectations by a student that it's didactic. We want to build up the expectation that it is social learning, that the learning is going to be gained by coming to class, that the learning happens in that classroom situation. So having a lecture delivery isn't really what I would be promoting, I suppose, if the world was open to anything. This language frames the student expectations and their behaviour, and I think we can do better with trying to contemporise our language. Have you investigated, you know, what will encourage student engagement? And this goes back to my language and use of language, but also what you're doing in the times when you meet with the students. I think it's incumbent on us to remember that as academics, we think, okay, what's the content going to be of this unit? What should the students learn? How will I teach it to address the content and help the students learn? How will the students be assessed? That's what we're thinking about, all these things. But all the students are thinking about is the assessment. How will I be assessed? What do I need to know to do well? What is the best approach that will guarantee me success? And success, it means in the assessment. So that's at the forefront of the students' minds, which can contrast obviously with our thinking. So if we're looking at the content and the assessment, then we need to look at things like the validity. Now, I'm possibly telling you exactly what you already know, but the perceived validity of assessment tasks and approaches, the extent to which the learning environment is empowering, and then the perceived fairness of the learning environment, especially with assessment tasks and practices. And some of this goes back to what Maree was saying. If our skill development within the time that we're with our students and the expectations as they are set does not meet what the assessment is asking for, then we're not being ethical. We're not marking what we have taught the students. So, and students hate anything that is unfair. Our students do. They certainly arc up. So with the validity, you're looking at the authentic and meaningful tasks, constantly talking about what they will need for their career. And again, Maree talked about bringing in somebody regularly who is a young professional economist, trying to bring them in and reinforce the need for certain skills. The need for these professional skills is paramount. It's very easy to disempower our students If we think that there is unrewarded learning, the relationship between the quantity of work and its weighting, or the disabling assessment mechanisms, which might be lack of information, inadequate feedback. And if the assessment methods don't fit with the espoused forms of learning, or again, with what the workplace seems to be indicating is needed as a skill. So I suppose one unit I can specifically focus on is management and organisation behaviour. This is taught in block mode. It's 3 hours, 3 times a week for 4 weeks. It is the only unit that students will do at that point. So our students over the semester will do 4, we say units, you say courses, but they are 4 weeks at a time. So a radical difference to many universities, but we have had some success. There is constant explanation of why activities are completed in class. There is class time for the learning and the doing of assessment, and there is a routine structure to every class. Only the intro to the topic is really lecturer-led, and that might only be 10 minutes. The rest is jigsaw reading and discussion, video case and discussion, reporting back with discussion, work on assessment in class, and then every class finishes with an online marked quiz. So students have to attend in order to achieve this learning. So I think I'll stop there, and there is no exam. And I'll wait for others to have their speak, and then hopefully some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. Fiona touched on the importance of assessment, and that leads us to Ismaeil here, who is an expert in assessment, focusing on that. So Ismaeil, in your experience, what is preferred assessment or preferred assessment methods for these types of courses?
Sure. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Thanks for the kind introduction. So as was mentioned by Maree and Fiona, so assessment and basically grades is what we can see, the students, well, at the back of students' mind, we can see it in a sense, right? You can sense it, right? So if that is what they care about, we might as well try to leverage that, right? So care about their grades, so we can tap into that potential, and we can build that interest of students, natural interest of students, into course design and into assessment design. So let me preface this by saying that, well, at least in the world of education, well, much less so in language education and in teaching writing in the disciplines. So in the broader field of education, in the past 2-3 decades, there has been a shift in spirit from a testing culture that is a mere heavy focus on grades, to sort of an assessment culture, rather than, yes, exactly. That's what I was referring to. Yeah, thank you so much for that. So there has been a shift in education, the general field of education, from assessment of learning, right, which is, testing, basically, and grades, so to assessment as learning and assessment for learning. So let me unpack that. So what do we mean by learning for, basically learning-oriented assessment, or assessment for learning and assessment as learning? Well, there are 3 main attributes that are often associated with learning-oriented assessment, or assessment for and assessment as, rather than just assessment of learning. And these 3 attributes, well, if you can show the next slide, it'll be awesome. I apologize, I don't think it's much visible, but anyway, I'll explain that. So there are three main attributes. First is essentially building the learning orientation in assessment design. And what we mean by that is trying to design assignments and assessments, as Fiona said, as much as possible, trying to aligning the assignments and assessments with what students will be basically performing in communicative contexts outside the classroom in their future career. So to see the authenticity, to be able to relate to them, that we know research has indicated that builds motivation, or that augments motivation of students and engagement. So in order to be conducive to learning, assessment tasks need to be designed with learning outcomes in mind. And those learning outcomes need to be aligned with what students will be doing in real life or on the job down the road. And they also need to tap into higher order thinking skills. I'm not going to get into the specifics of Bloom's taxonomy. You all know that better than I do. So to the extent possible, tapping into the higher order thinking skills. So that's the basically the learning orientation and assignment or assessment design. That's number one, the first attribute. The second attribute is learner engagement or student engagement. Student engagement in evaluative practices, mainly through self-assessment and peer assessment. Now, self-assessment is not necessarily assessment in the sense of grading, but rather it can be, it can cover a spectrum. It can be something as simple as a checklist based on which students sort of monitor and self-edit their own performance, like before, submitting any rounds of, tasks or assignments. And same with peer assessment. Now, the benefit of doing this kind of assessment, well, besides saving some time, it can spare the faculty some time, is that by engaging students in the evaluative practices, well, they sort of develop a nose for quality, in a sense, so to speak. So they know, well, of course, initially there might be some resistance, but they need to be trained. So the students need to be explicitly trained how to frame, feedback. That I spent a lot of time actually at the outset of every term, before I let students engage in peer assessment and self-assessment, I teach them how to frame feedback. Now, we know from research that there's actually an article which I really like, and that is, to give is better than to receive. So research has indicated that when students provide feedback, so providing feedback is more cognitively engaging and demanding than just receiving, to be on the receiving end of the feedback. And the students sort of develop an evaluative capacity through, being trained, and then through getting involved and engaged in evaluation, basically. So there's a lot of learning in that, but the capacity needs to be built, basically. So they need training. And also, another important aspect of that is, in order for students to be able to assess accurately and fairly, they need to have a good understanding of, an in-depth understanding of the criteria in the rubric. So that can be facilitated through providing exemplars, right? So good exemplars, bad exemplars, and then co-rating or co-evaluating with students so that they get a sense of what we mean by this specific criteria, A or B or C or D. Now, the last attribute of learning-oriented assessment is dialogic, to the extent possible, dialogic rather than monologic, and multimodal where possible, feedback or feed forward, as some people have referred to it. So feed forward essentially refers to the type of feedback that is aimed at enabling students to perform better in their subsequent related tasks, rather than comments or qualitative or quantitative kind of feedback and grades that do not really connect much, if at all, to the student's future performance. There's more to that, but I think in the interest of time, so I'll wait for the next round, and then I'll speak perhaps to the challenges of implementing learning-oriented assessment and specifications grading model. Thank you.
Ismaeil, that was really helpful. Thank you. And we have our final panelists in the room here in person.
Hey.
Joel.
Hi.
I was teaching.
Yeah, it was fine. I'm very tired. I got at 5 a.m. to do a webinar for Pakistan this morning. So, well, do I need to be up here?
Yeah, see where the camera is pointed?
No,
I have your slides here. But
I don't see where the camera's pointed. Sorry, where is it?
It's SFU Econ. It's pointed.
Oh, why don't you just do this? Yeah. Where am I meant to be?
Sit here.
We can move the camera.
This is so fun.
So yeah, it was.
Are there a lot of people online? Yes, ma'am.
Instructed to.
Oh, hey. Oh, that's cool. But then if I'm okay, all right.
You might have to stand.
Okay.
And you can hold this.
Okay.
He's tired. You heard.
I'm so tired.
Just
Okay.
need to click.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, so I'll be brief. So hi, everyone. I feel like I can greet almost everyone here by name. Anka, Brian, Martine, Claudia. Hello, those of you who I don't know, hi. You may remember me from my strange brief dalliance with the dismal science a few years ago when I worked with a unit that no longer exists called Salter. It seems like a dream now.
And Ismaeil used to work.
Ismaeil used to work with me there. Yeah, that's right. So it's where the gang's all back together.
And Fiona visited Salter.
I don't think I was there when she visited. Yeah. But here we are. I'm going to talk a little bit about academic integrity because if you ever talked to me back when I was bothering econ people, I loved to talk to you all about why your students were taking tutorials from private companies. And I've now have a SSHRC-funded project to study that. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm going to talk a little bit about the implications of two areas that we're seeing a lot of talk about right now. One is private tutoring, which is the project that I'm working on. The other is AI language modeling, which is, I mean, nobody will shut up about it. It's constantly in the news. I think it was on the front page of the New York Times a few days ago. So everyone is freaking out about this. How can we prevent students from just putting their writing assignments into these chatbots and just having them produced? I don't have a cut and dry solution to that, but I want to tell you what we've been learning from our research a little bit in talking to students. So very briefly, this project, which you can find more information about here if you like, we are just analyzing the data right now. We distributed a survey to 3 universities in BC, to 898 students. We are generally focusing on those who are both considered international and users of English as an additional language, of whom there were 625. We've interviewed 26 of them, and they're from a variety of backgrounds, majors, years in university, and so on. Some certainly are economic students, others are not. And we're learning, is there any way I can get the Zoom photo? I can't see some of my slides. Is there any way we can get the Zoom pictures to somehow move a little, or I don't know. Sorry, I think you can. Yeah, somehow. Yeah, there we go. Even on the side, it's good. Oh yeah, there we go. Perfect. So a few things that we're finding in talking to students. One, academic work is collaborative. We know this from our own experience as academics. Students collaborate, either licitly or illicitly. So 90% of the students we surveyed have sought some help with their academic work in some way. Study groups, writing centers, peer tutoring, TA or instructor office hours, by far the most common, by the way. I think you'll be happy to know. 90% of them said I've gone to my TA or to my instructor, which is good. 30% of those students that we surveyed said they have paid for help with their academic work, and that's where we get into a bit more of a gray area. So this would be, the most common is websites like Chegg or Course Hero, which you can do a lot of different things on, including getting solutions. Paid language or content tutors. So this is where we would see the students taking econ or business tutorials at Mandarin language private companies. If you have any questions about that, we can talk more. Occasionally paid editors or proofreaders, and they will very occasionally admit to paid ghostwriters. We had one student in our survey admit to this. Nobody knows the real numbers. It's notoriously difficult to get people to speak openly about this. The research that I've read suggests anything from 3 to like 12% of students might be doing this type of thing. When it comes to, so literally I pay you to write for me under my name. So I pay you $100, you write my paper, and I turn it in with my own name. I think I wrote this in a different font. Sorry, help is not supposed to look like that. AI and human help is happening. We know this. It is happening right now. It's too late to put the whatever back in the whatever, the rabbit in the hat. I don't know what the genie in the bottle, the jack in the box. I don't know, whatever. So this, you've probably heard of ChatGPT, which is an advanced language model that you can kind of interact with online. If you haven't tried it out, try it. It's pretty interesting. It can write and correct computer programming code. I had my students today tell me in a discussion we had, first year students, yes, we are doing this. We are putting code into this and it is correcting our code for us. It can provide relatively accurate summaries of texts. I say relatively because it is not always, and in fact, it is often somewhat inaccurate, but it's usually good enough. As people say, it's about as good as a mediocre high school student. Yeah, relatively accurate. Sorry, that's supposed to be something else. I don't know what I meant there. Very tight. Okay. Private tutoring agencies are offering first language test-wise tutorials. I say test-wise because I think that's probably a big difference between the services that these kind of para-educational companies are providing and what we might do on our own tutorials at the university. So a lot of the, kind of as the previous speakers were saying, students are very conscious of grades. That tends to be top of mind. We also see that in our survey. What are the reasons you seek paid help? Almost always number one when given a choice. I want a higher GPA, I want better grades. I feel like I need to do it to keep up with the curve, these types of things, right? And so test wiseness is sort of baked into their model. They will advertise, for example, we guarantee you'll get a B+ in your class if you take our tutorial, stuff like that. Test taking strategies, these types of things are front and center in these tutorials. Many students feel ambivalent about gray areas of academic integrity, we have found. So students will, we've seen a variety of responses in terms of whether they believe seeking paid help is unethical or not. Some feel conflicted about it, others do not. In general, these students who pay for example, these tutorials do not have a sense that what they are doing is somehow unethical or wrong or going against a university policy, and indeed it isn't. There is a bit more moral ambiguity when it comes to help with writing. So some people will say, yeah, I do feel a little bad about asking someone to work with me on writing a paper, but also I feel I have no choice because I feel at a disadvantage, perhaps because my first language is not English. I almost feel like this is the best option for me. It's either this or fail my course. Again, that might not be totally true, but that may be how they feel. This is the worst font. I had it in a different font. I'm so sorry. All these random capitalizations. So I think in response to, we know these things are happening now. So what are some things that we might do in the way we teach or design courses or assignments or assessments? Clarity about our expectations is key, right? And there are classic academic integrity cases. There's a very famous 2012 Harvard cheating scandal that hinged on a space after a comma appearing in hundreds of students' responses. In this case, collaboration was allowed for studying, but not for answering the questions. And so the professor flunked like 200 students. He ended up not getting tenure. It was a whole thing. One student in our study felt falsely accused of cheating because a study group shared notes. They actually got warnings from the dean of their faculty. This was, I won't mention the name of the university. It wasn't this one. And he said to us, I will never join a study group again. It's not worth it. I've been falsely accused of sort of colluding to cheat. So that is an unfortunate case of a professor saying you may collaborate on studying, but then in the student's view, sort of then turning that around and saying, well, I think you cheated by working together with your classmates. The nature and extent of acceptable collaboration is often unclear to students. Students want to and do collaborate, but the mismatch between student beliefs about what is acceptable, university policy, and the way that policy is applied can be very difficult for students. Some students, and we can take this with a grain of salt if we want, report looking for solutions on websites like Chegg, not simply to copy, but to learn from. We actually saw this from quite a few students. You might say, well, they were just saying that to you because you're a researcher from a university. Maybe, I don't know. But some students say, no, I'm not going there just to copy for my homework. I want to understand step by step how this works so that when I'm faced with it on an exam, I can meet the challenge that I need to. How might we then work this stuff into our own assignment design? A few thoughts. Everyone will have a different approach. Balancing process and product, right? I think oftentimes, when grades are the bottom line and a perfectly polished finished product is the assumed sort of desired deliverable, students may be pushed to seek help in ways we would not like them to. I teach a first-year writing class. I occasionally will have a student struggle throughout the entire term, and maybe you've seen this, and then turn in a spotlessly perfect final draft of a paper. It is beyond obvious that the student did not write the paper, and I tell them so, and then the whole story comes out. How might we encourage students that we are not looking for flawless, publishable prose, but for evidence that they have struggled with, learned, processed the material? Iterative writing assignments, this is pretty classic, but this is something that's been recommended for a while now. Rather than one-shot assignments where there's a large percentage of the grade dependent on a single draft of an essay or a single in-class, several paragraph essay, can we gradually build up? Can students write several pieces that later become the basis of a larger piece? Can students, in theory, the W criteria calls for revision in some way, right? So can students write even a page that is later given TA feedback and then later is folded into a larger project with improvement, with revision, this type of thing. I threw collaborative writing up there just kind of to see what you thought of it. Maybe we could try that. Maybe when students are, the stakes are not simply, I will turn something into a faceless, and not that a TA is faceless, but to a TA I don't know well, and they will mark it and that's the end of it. If a student has responsibilities to their peers where they are putting together a project, where each person is responsible for some writing, some revision, some peer feedback, perhaps that would lessen the temptation to seek help elsewhere where we feel like perhaps they wouldn't be learning the material the way we'd want them to. And then finally, including sort of reflective or sort of like hyper-local elements. So just half an hour ago in my writing class, we started talking about the use of these AI, ChatGPT and these things. And I mentioned that it can write, one student said, well, what if you had to write a paper about supply and demand for your econ class? And I said, I bet it could explain what the concept of supply and demand is. I know that many lay people, including myself, get it totally wrong. I don't discount that. And one student had a very cogent statement. She said, well, yes, it could do that. But if you gave an assignment to talk about, it was creative. She said, if you gave an assignment to talk about, I don't know, hair care products in BC during the pandemic, it's very unlikely that it could produce anything remotely accurate about what was going on with the supply and demand of hair care products in British Columbia from 2020 to 2022. Not that you're necessarily an expert in that either, but I thought that was an interesting point. I thought, and of course, the notion of building in some reflexivity or some reflection. When these particular things occurred in our class, how did you react to those things? How does that impact sort of the way you learn the material? Things that it's difficult to get artificial or outside input on. We're not trying to trick students here, but I think we can design things in a way that is more likely to sort of engage them in some kind of learning that is more present with either sort of metacognitive, sort of self-reflective kind of stuff that we might encourage, or a kind of, in the collaborative sense, in a kind of way that involves more peer and kind of just human interaction. So those are some thoughts. I mean, this stuff is kind of just me riffing on stuff that I've learned from the students we've talked to in our study, but I thought it was maybe worth thinking about. So I apologize if I went too long there, I'm running on fumes, but thank you so much for having me, Sepideh, and everyone else. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was really helpful. And now it's time to go to the audience, and let's start with Martin, and then we take questions from those people who are on.
Since we have you here.
Sure.
What I wonder sometimes is I can see why people would go to hire a tutor, right? What I don't understand necessarily is go down the hall here, you see business school has writing tutors.
Mm-hmm.
Even here in economics, we have in-house writing tutors.
Mm-hmm.
to go to student learning commons in the library, writing tutors, proofreaders, all these resources are there. However, people choose not to use those resources. And they rather go the route of paying somebody to write the resource.
I have a related practical question. Are these at night?
Yeah, so I can give you 3 related reasons, I think, why we might see this. Some are based on what we hear from students, others are based on just sort of inferences in my experience with these. One is accessibility in terms of the times that these things are available. So one of the students said, yeah, I will go to my TA if I need help, but I can only go to my TA during their office hours. If I have a question about my assignment at midnight on Saturday, the company that I pay will immediately respond to my chat. So that's one. I know, and I know you want to speak back to that student and say, no, it doesn't have to be that way, but this is just something they tell us, right? The second is shame, to be seen, to having to go to a peer to say, I don't understand this. Can you explain it to me? We've seen research where students say, I would rather not have my peers see me walk into the writing center, see me walk into the learning commons. I'm embarrassed. So that's another one. The third that we hear from the students is cultural and linguistic familiarity, right? To be able to go to someone who speaks your first language and can say, I can see exactly what you're trying to do here grammatically. This doesn't make sense in English. Let me explain it to you in Mandarin, for example, and then we can come to an understanding of what you did wrong. So that first language support does, for some students, feel crucial. Yeah.
I advocate having our tutors in Mandarin.
As Anka knows, I have suggested it as well. Does that sort of address what you're talking about? Yeah, okay.
Looks like maybe reason number 4, when the English proficiency is so low that there's, even with the help of a writing tutor, there's almost no hope. You can bring it up to a level where you can turn in essays. And we have data that from 2020, I believe, from our writing tutors that we have mostly very homogeneous international students.
Sure. Sure.
And they have this group thing, right? They have the entire ecosystem around it with tutors, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
But also we find that the English proficiency is extremely low. So 40%, correct me if I'm wrong, your own data, so 40% are you basically not speak, understand English. Another 40% it's marginal. When you're at this level, it's extremely difficult to write in.
Right.
And I see it in 4th year classes, in seminar classes, that I have 18 students in class for all international students, who 16 of whom struggle extremely with the English language. And I got the perfect paper sent in, right? And you can say, if I did the paper using this strategy, iterative and blah, 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 but I cannot do this without support, right?
Right.
TA support, I can do it with 5 students. I cannot do it with 20.
Right.
It's
Or 60 or 200.
It's just not possible.
Right.
I
think my experience when I was sort of informally consulting with your department, I mean, those are the issues that came up time and time again. Yeah.
And the university doesn't care too much about it because it's so localized in certain departments.
Yes.
Most of all, I believe, economics, and this is very sad.
Well, thank you. Let's go to Zoom and see if you have any questions there, Sarah. We can't see the chat box, Sarah, from here, so.
We had Lucas and Maree had their hands up.
Oh, sorry, I had my mic off. Maree is ready to make a comment. I think she was going to respond to the question, and then Lucas had his hand up as well.
Yes,
Great, thank you.
Yeah, just briefly, and just keep in mind that we're here, and you know that there's a lot of us with experience in kind of trying to provide support to those kinds of students. And what we found, what Fiona and I have found, is this has been a problem that's been, you know, it's not specific to international students, and it's something to do with relationship building, and it's something to do with being sent off to find help somewhere else. Students are time poor, increasingly so. They want to be able to be in control of when they dedicate time to what, and they will try and be as efficient as they possibly can in sourcing that support. So they might be doing it at 2 o'clock in the morning. They might decide to do it at a time that's less, you know, and also sort of logging into something online is much less demanding in terms of building a personal rapport or relationship with the person who you're asking support from. It is completely the same for domestic students and international students. So struggling domestic students are also quite reluctant to go out of the classroom and seek support from a sort of like an anonymous person. So the thing that we found works really effectively is making sure that who is designated to provide the writing support to that particular subject area or course area is actually introduced by the discipline academic inside the classroom and allowed to take up a little bit of discipline sort of space and time to build that sort of rapport and to show those students that, hey, we are respected members of the team here. We provide the service that you need, and we're going to show you that we are right across the requirements of this assessment that you're working on right now. So if you're struggling, here's where we are, and you can come to us. We're part of the team. And that has a dramatic impact on how students, what we've found at both of our universities, has a dramatic impact on how students use the resources and the support.
And to add to that, especially your students who are predominantly Chinese, I know from teaching in China that they expect a lot of that, what they need to know, to be delivered in the classroom. So there's two issues here. One is, I mean, I know we certainly do send students off to support, but there has a problem. The Chinese students aren't used to that instruction, and nor do they expect to get it. So they expect that their teacher will teach them everything that they need to know inside class time. And that would be a strong argument for the intense face-to-face timetabled classroom sessions. Okay, somebody else has their hand up.
We go to Lucas, and then we go back to the second round of questions, and then we get back to the audience after the second round. Lucas?
Hi, first, in the classroom, could you maybe lower the camera a little bit and swing it over to the right? Because I can't see anyone, only just the head of one person.
Okay.
There's a remote control. You can, and a little wheel with arrows on it, and then you can use, oh, exactly, and maybe zoom out a little bit if that's right, if that works, using the minus key on there.
Minus.
We're just physically moving a.
Yeah. Use the remote control.
Here, I'll play with it and see what
It's pretty cool.
This thing?
It's pretty amazing. Anyway, thanks. I can see more now. That's good, but more would be better. I was just wondering, are we chasing the wrong target here with regards to the AI stuff? So basically, I was also part of this academic discussion email thread, and I read everything, and then people saying, yeah, in English, English professors were saying, yeah, but the program can only write at the level of a C+ student. In econ, it might be more of an A- student, depending on what we're asking for. But I was just thinking, so the program that beat humans at Go, for example, went in from beating amateurs to beating the world champion in, I think, 1.5 years. So I'm just saying, what else is going to happen, right? Like, I don't want to just think super duper hard to come up with some strategy that'll serve me for 1.5 years. So right now I can ask, I totally agree that asking a chatbot to talk about like the effects of the pandemic on supply and demand in the market for hair products is exactly the kind of question that the AI would struggle with. But do we think that won't be different in 2 years? Maybe 5 years. Like, at what point should we start thinking of like, are we going to shouldn't we try to train students for a workforce where they're going to be collaborating with the AI, or where the range of things that the median student can do better than an AI is just not there anymore.
So this question is for Joe.
Oh, I don't.
Whoever wants to take it.
I have nothing to say.
Okay.
No, I just want to say, going back to Lucas' point that agree. There's people already at the university who are letting students use chat as part of the written assignments. That may be more eventually down the line, what's coming. There you can do policing, or you can do, hey,
Yeah.
how are we gonna, deal with this? It's out there, but what are the impacts on learning? How is the fact that people now are gonna writing, not just for school, but for work and for life, things for a chat GPT or whatever the next version is called. How is that gonna affect people's skills, critical thinking skills, capacity to create independent idea? Those I think are more relevant questions in terms of chat GPT, rather than policing it.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
Yeah.
Policy, so.
Thank you. That brings us to the conversation about the cultural integrity. That's my next question for Joel, but let's start with Maree again.
Oh, there was one person with their hand up still.
Oh, can we take that question after the second, because I'm just one the time here. We'll get back to the audience for sure at the end. Just a quick round here. We have almost 30 minutes left. Maree, for you, focusing on the context of economics here, in your experience, what are some of the most successful teaching approaches to building writing skills in economics? And what are some pitfalls for academic skills teachers to avoid?
Thanks. I'm just going to take
Take the screen.
take the screen.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not going to talk about AI, although obviously it's an issue everywhere. It's a global issue, and I agree with the last speaker, Lucas, that this is we basically have to accept that sort of technology is going to just keep getting better and better, and we have to start asking ourselves, at what point do we stop resisting and trying to find workarounds, and at what point do we accept that the game has changed? And the game changing doesn't necessarily mean that there's no longer a role for good teaching in the area of expression and critical thinking by the humans. So it's just that the areas in which that critical thinking and expression will be applied will be a different area, and it'll be within the realm of a different game. So I'm going to limit my discussion, I suppose, to what I've read about the Economics W course in second year here. And one of the things that I picked up from the documentation that I was sent round is that students are being marked on criteria which has picked out their ability to discern main points in an argument, their ability to use logic, and their ability to support their arguments with evidence. But actually the amount of classroom time that's being spent teaching students to develop those skills through practice is quite limited. There's a first year unit that covers foundations, but it might not specifically cover, the high level sorts of skills like that students need to master to produce a really good assignment. And then students are sent out of the classroom to find support to sort of hone those skills in mastering that assessment. And of course, many of them will turn to AI, many of them will turn to websites, many of them will turn to people who can help them get the best mark possible, because that's what their parents sacrificed and paid money to send them here to do. So, we have to sort of think about how can we support the genuine desire in many of these students to actually be here to learn something. And I think that we shouldn't be too cynical about that. We should actually, sort of like see that many students are genuinely wanting to learn, but find the crushing weight of what they're expected to learn within the time frame, and the lack of classroom teaching around those skills absolutely crushing. So my first point is that that we as teachers, whether we're academic skills teachers or whether we're discipline academics, need to be aware of the messages that we are giving to students from day one. Right, so from day one in the classroom, if the message we're giving is you're going to be rewarded on your ability to individually pass this assignment, you know, with excellent communication and written skills, and it's up to you to work out how you get the skills to do that, because we're hands off about that. You can go and work that out yourself. If that's the message that we're giving students, then obviously they are going to be looking at the most efficient ways for them to meet those targets that we're setting. If the message that we're giving students is that the complex skills of sifting information, sorting through it, summarizing important points, applying research to arguments is something that you're going to have to use as a graduate from the very day you graduate in your job search process all the way through your career. And that every single thing that you're learning to master here in these 3 years, you are going to be referring to and building on for the rest of your career. And if that's the message students are getting, and if that's what's being rewarded, their ability to engage with the sort of the gradual development of those skills, then that's going to really influence how students see the development of writing skills. The other thing is that writing skills don't develop in a vacuum from critical thinking skills. Writing skills arise out of students' abilities to understand what is being required of them and how can I engage with the debates in the literature. So how can I personally engage with that? So some of the stuff that Ismaeil was talking about before, where students are really encouraged to take responsibility for seating their engagement within their own experience. So from year one, you know, how do ethical practices in banks influence my decisions about which banks I use? How do I engage with the work of, you know, theories around the work of the World Bank, for example, and how they impact on economics in developing countries? How does that impact on my country? How does that impact on how people in my family are able to sort of develop intergenerational wealth? So those sorts of questions that really get students to engage actively with the material are the starting point for students saying, I can do this. I can master these skills. And I think the messages that we often give in our discipline areas, not necessarily in the academic writing area, but certainly in the discipline areas, is what we need you to do is fast track to being able to demonstrate your ability to do this before we get on to the next assessment, because academics are also very time poor. So everybody's looking for the most efficient way to get from point A to point B. So the messages that we're giving to students have to be that working collegially with other students is a plus. It's something that's going to be rewarded. You are going to get marks for doing that, right? You are being open to feedback from other students is something that's going to be part of your assessment grade. If the assessment grade is all about the tick and flick at the end, or the perfection of the written word of your individual assignment, and that's it, then that's the thing that students are going to value. Related to that, I just wanted to raise the point that one of the things that I found works very effectively as a discipline academic is getting experts in from the field who say categorically, I would not be where I am today if I hadn't spent hundreds of hours throughout my student life and since then working on my communication skills. You know, you need young, early career graduates to come into that classroom and say to students, this is the way that these skills have impacted on my career development since leaving university. When I have to write memos, these are the things that I draw on from my undergrad. When I have to write a report for my superiors, these are the skills that are really valued. And there's no way that going to a chat bot or sort of being able to, you know, going to a cheap site or whatever is going to help me in that meeting when my boss is asking me to give an impromptu assessment of the benefits of one theory or one way of going forward for the company as opposed to another. So we need to get those early career graduates to come in and spell it out for students why there's a real benefit in spending the time developing the skills, because why else would a student invest in that? I think one of the things that really strikes a chord for students in my experience is really showing that relationship between practice and getting a little bit better every time, and knowing that each time you do something over 3 years, then over 10 years, then over 20 years, you are going to get better and better and better about it. It's not about domestic students are good at this and international students will always be crap at this. And that's often the message that international students get. They are left to flounder. They are left to work it out by themselves. They are given the impression they will always be second rate compared to students who have the better language skills. Why would you bother if in your own country you are thought of as a highly talented, clever student, but once you come to an English-speaking country, you're a C-grade student and you can never get out of that basket? So something needs to be done here to really turn what the learning process is all about on its head and to give students opportunities. The final thing I just wanted to say was one of the pitfalls, and you asked me to mention pitfalls, one of the pitfalls in getting these things to upgrade and starting to rethink this whole question are discipline academics' own perceptions about themselves, about what matters to them. If discipline academics themselves actually have little or no respect for communication and expression of ideas, then they are going to convey that really, really clearly. And it doesn't matter what performance goes on in the co-teaching arrangement or, you know, the scripted kind of comments that academics might say to their classes. If they have a deep-seated either lack of regard for or lack of interest in themselves personally, or maybe even a lack of confidence themselves in the whole area of written and spoken communication, then that will convey itself. And I think it's a real pitfall that we need to sort of like try hard to hone in on to avoid that falling into despair outcome, which we so often see. That's all.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Maree. Maree talked about the importance of supporting students first before we expect a lot of things from them. And I know you, Fiona, from working with you more than a decade ago, that you're passionate about student support, basically, and you're passionate about building a sound and multi or dimensional structure surrounding these types of courses when the students can feel supported outside the walls. So my question for you is, in your experience, what's the value of having multiple ways of supporting students' academic writing?
Thank you, Sep. Do we want to ask Lucas what his question is? He's had his hand up there for a while. Lucas, was your question?
Yeah, thank you. Just on the last point here about how students might feel about the culture we're creating, I agree almost entirely with what was said. I think I've always been trying to create a culture of achievement goals without I always remind students that I'm obviously English as an additional language learner, and that in fact not as a second either. But I just would like to point out that the way our demographics are in the classroom, Chinese students do not need to worry about being always second class in the classroom in terms of their language skills, because all the top students in the class are also Chinese. They can very clearly see this. It's we have 80 to 90% Chinese speakers in the classroom, so they do not need to worry about like being the bottom half or anything just because they're by far the majority. That's a little different from outside the classroom. I totally see that. They might still feel like they're not not necessarily expected to succeed in an English-speaking workplace necessarily. In many cases, they want to get degrees so that they can look impressive in the Chinese-speaking workplace, of course. In many cases, not in all.
Okay, I'll pick up on my question now. So the value to students of having multiple writing support strategies. I definitely clearly want to say, I think the gold standard is having embedded, integrated communication, discipline subjects that is carried through, that the message is carried through and the skill development is carried through, even by non-writing courses that are taught, so that when a student looks at their whole course, that they see that critical thinking, critical reading, that these skills are systematically developed and rewarded throughout the whole curriculum of their whole qualification. I'm not quite sure the right language for Canada there. But in Melbourne, we certainly have, yes, multiple writing support strategies. They're not just writing, I mean, they are multiple academic literacy support strategies, and they go from what we call light touch to the intensive, highly integrated. And the benefit of multiple strategies are that some of them are independent, some of them are online, some of them are face-to-face, some of them are one-to-one, some of them are group, supporting that social need. And some students want to come as a single entity to a face-to-face or to a one-to-one. But some of them will come in pairs. Some of them, will come with 3 or 4 because that is their group, and they do everything as that group. They live together sometimes as that group, and then they travel around campus and do their learning together. That's fine. We can cater by having multiple ways of giving the support, providing support. We can cater for different learning styles. And then, of course, there's the different study work arrangements. Melbourne students, can be doing a full workload, but also doing a full-time employment. You and I could say this is crazy, but it happens. So we have to live with it and offer that anytime, anywhere, anyhow, they can get the support possible. There are other students who need spaced learning, who may come to us once a week or once a fortnight for a short period of time. And they sort of spaced learning, but it's also just in time. They're getting it when they need it. So the value of having multiple support strategies is trying to reach the variety of student needs. And I suppose probably the strongest strategy we offer is our peer-led or mentors, student peer mentors, who we train as in certain aspects of the learning, the academic literacy sort of cycle, and who then will work with small groups of students, usually subject course specific. And so these are sort of better students, and we pay them to give the support to whether it's the economy students or the accounting students or the law students. They are students from those areas who we have worked with, and then maybe a year ahead of, so third years providing support for first and second years. I'm going to stop there. There's another hand up, so let's.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Yeah, I see. Yeah,
we did have a question earlier from Hassan as well. I'm not sure if he wanted to ask his question as well.
Yes. So Hassan is joining us, or is he here already? Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Yep, he's there on Zoom. He had his hand up earlier. Do you want to go ahead, Hassan?
Yes.
Sure, thank you. It was less related to the talk that just came now, but I will try to keep it quick. Thank you all for the very insightful discussions. I guess many of the challenges we've got with students, I'm an academic at the University of Queensland in Australia. Many of the challenges we've got with students cheating is that the incentive for getting a good mark is higher than actually learning, right? We tend to think this good mark is going to get me more in my future rather than me actually learning this. Coming back to what Lucas said, yeah, well-designed assessments today, there might be things that it cannot do today, but it will be able to do by the end of the year. ChatGPT-4 is due to come out in a few months, and it's meant to be much stronger than what we have in ChatGPT-3. So in my own teaching, one of the things I've done, and I would really love to hear feedback, is not to necessarily redesign course so that it's not being able to be done by AI. Essentially, a lot of the foundational teaching and learning that we do is to teach them the fundamentals of a discipline. And these are things that may very well be done by AI. However, if you want to redesign it so that it cannot be done by AI today, it might just compromise the quality of that learning without any long-term benefits, because it's not a long-term skill that might not be done by AI, and it might actually be done by AI next year as well. On one of my assignments, one of the things I've done, and I'm really sort of excited to see how it goes out, is for one of my assignments, I've given sort of what ChatGPT gives as the solution, as the starting point. Here's the question, here's the response. Now you're going to be, this is sort of your grade 0. And any track changes that you make in terms of making this better, in terms of actually finding what the errors are, is essentially what you're being marked by. And I'm excited to see how that goes. That evaluative judgment that Ismaeil, you were also talking about, actually getting them to evaluate this and sort of the shortcomings of this might be something helpful in terms of getting them to work with that. And one final one, Fiona, just on what you were mentioning, I think ChatGPT is actually hard to beat as a support for writing. It's there 24/7. It answers any questions you've got right on the spot. You ask it to reword, rephrase. You ask it to give feedback. You ask it to elaborate more on a particular aspect. But at the same time, I think, coming back, we need to tell students that at some point in your life, you're going to be judged based on what you can answer on the spot without having the time to go back to ChatGPT. You can be a doctor and you're meeting someone. You can't have ChatGPT on the side and say, let me clarify if ChatGPT thinks you've got X or Y.
That's right.
I might stop there, but really exciting times ahead. And yeah, looking forward to how we can all rethink what education means in the new era with AI right under our shoulders. Thank you.
Fiona, did you want to respond?
GM Myers has had his hand up for a while.
Oh, yeah. Just before going there, Hassan is actually a data scientist working with the Department of Economics at the University of Queensland, and specifically focusing on AI and the coding side of it. So maybe our next panel would be with Hassan. Gord, yes, we go. Gord, can I ask that we go to you, back to you after Ismaeil, because we have less than 15 minutes time, and we have Ismaeil and Joel for the second round, and then we get back to Gord after that. If I apologize for that, just trying to manage time here.
No,
sorry about that. Yes.
You don't need to. You don't need to get back to me if you don't have time.
It's okay. I mean,
you can skip me. I don't need to. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's fine, yeah.
Well, wait, did you have anything? Are you saying you have nothing meaningful to say?
No, I think it's better to have discussion from others.
You can stay long.
So now that Joel, so Gord, let's go to you first, and then we go back to Ismaeil later. Yeah, you.
Yeah, no, I agree with Lucas that the discussion has been stimulating for sure. I've been writing some stuff down. Got two things. I was actually in central administration for quite a few years, so hanging around with faculty of education folks, and so it's been this is bringing back memories for sure. So and others, of course. I know you're not all faculty of education. So one comment is that strikes me is well, two things. One is in economics. the primary language of argument once you get into senior courses, and to quite a large extent even in introductory courses, is math. And the reason for that is a good reason. It's, math was designed to avoid the ambiguity of verbal languages. And so you can make a long logical argument starting way over there and ending up over there without any mistakes. And, stealing from extremely brilliant people like Lagrange and so on from 500 years ago. So what that means is we need to make our students math literate. And then if you add on the fact that there really is a lot of straight non-communication disciplinary kind of stuff that we're trying to convey to create people that can go work in the Bank of Canada and not do anything crazy to damage the economy and hurt people, then you start getting into, high opportunity cost of classroom time. And that was something that I could never quite, I'm wondering, there's math literacy, there's English literacy that they definitely need to deal with. And then there's all the disciplinary material that we need to get to them, and limited classroom time. So I'm just wondering, is there work about that, or is there, math literacy a whole other parallel universe in faculty of education stuff? I'll stop there.
Hey, any of the panelists wants to respond to that question, or? So basically, it's like a cost and benefit thing. The cost for content courses. Anyone like to speak? Or we can put it in our discussion after, so colleagues can respond to this question. So can we go to Ismaeil now? I can't see Ismaeil.
I'm here.
Okay, right. Okay, so my question for Ismaeil, you talked about some recent and heated discussion topics like learning-oriented assessment or specifications grading. These are new and recent, and we are talking about it here in this faculty. I know that it's recent and new. So can you please tell us more about these and also the challenges in implementing these new approaches? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So I talked briefly about learning-oriented assessment and the three core principles or attributes, basically, which are learning orientation as much as possible, bringing learning orientation to assessment design and assignment design, and second, involving students in evaluation, as Hassan also indicated. That can also be something that we tap into, and feeding forward and dialogic, if possible, and multimodal feedback. So one of the things that I've actually started doing is that, well, based on what I've read, on this topic, is providing not just written feedback, but also audio or video feedback, in addition to, where possible. And of course, that does not work, obviously, with large class sizes, but here at Vantage College at UBC, we don't have large classes, thankfully. So also accompanying that with student-teacher conferencing, so 3 types of feedback. So using multiple ways of feedback, and then sort of designing assignments, especially that works with writing, such that, and that's something that Joel also touched upon, there is iteration, so there is drafting, multiple drafting, and so maximizing the feedback uptake. Now, when it comes to challenges, I would divide the challenges into 2 categories. Well, challenges facing instructors and faculty, and then that is a whole different discussion. So the buy-in and the assessment literacy or feedback literacy, and students feedback literacy, and priming students, right? So students' expectations, which is something that Maree and Fiona also touched upon. And so a lot of our students, our international students here at UBC, I do remember from my experience of teaching also at SFU, they are used to an exam oriented or exam focused culture, so a testing culture. So sort of to convince them that, to get this buy-in, that they can also get to assess, and evaluate the work. So a lot of them, they are resistant at least at the outset. So there needs to be that negotiation, and we need to make the implicit explicit that actually in the real world you need to have that evaluative capacity, and that is no less, that's a skill or sensibility that they need to develop, and it's no less important than other thinking skills like critical thinking. So evaluation. So again, going back to Bloom's taxonomy, so they need to be sold, basically, this idea. And once we have that buy-in, and that's a challenge that I've been facing this challenge, and I don't have an answer to that, but that also is a challenge. And one, well, there's no panacea, but one, rather recent approach, is specs grading or specifications grading, and that basically is aligned with learning-oriented assessment for and as learning. And what that means simply is breaking down the course assignments and assessments into modules, into specific modules and components, and then sort of bundling them. And then the students, they get to choose. So there's of course a spectrum, right? So you can implement it in its pure form, or you can implement it partially. And then the students are graded often based on a pass and fail basis, on individual assignments, on bundles, or on specific modules. So transparency obviously is needed. So faculty and instructors need to provide very clear, very transparent, detailed specifications for those specific modules for what constitutes passing, what constitutes, high quality work, which is pass. So we're not lowering the bar, but the students need to basically have at least one opportunity, or more than one opportunity, to sort of revise their work, such that it reaches basically the desired goal. So I'm gonna stop here. I know that it's almost, I'm so sorry.
We have a few minutes left, and Anka here raised her hand. So
sorry.
No, please.
Yeah. Well, I think specifications grading is something that a lot of people might be interested in, but we didn't give an example. So I think most people don't have no clue what you're talking about. So maybe if you could give a specific example of what specifications grading would be, I think that would be helpful. Thanks. And thanks everybody else for the discussion and presentations. Very helpful.
So for example, well, in one of the courses that I'm teaching here at Vantage College, so the students have to do basically different assignments. One of them is data commentary. We call it data commentary anyway. So that now constitutes a module, right? But they also have to write, an analytic essay later on. So that is a module. It's that data commentary, for example, it's broken down into sub-modules. And so if they want to achieve an A grade, they have to use more evidence. So in addition to, say, statistics, they also need to search for and use journal articles related to that, and of course get it approved, first. So there is more if they want an A grade, but if they want a B grade in that data commentary, then they just would, need to use statistics, for example, to, write that data commentary. But if they want to achieve an A, which a lot of them try, obviously first is, the requirement is basically to use more, right? To put in more work, to use their critical evaluative capacity more through bringing in more evidence, as an example, so the work is more demanding in category A, it's less demanding in category B. That's an example of partial implementation of this specifications grading.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you. Okay, we almost, time is almost off, but do we have any questions left over Zoom, Sarah, or we're good?
No more questions coming in from Zoom.
Great, and Joel, did you want to add a few? And you didn't get a chance for the.
I don't know.
Actually, I had a question for you about the
I'll try to answer it in 30 seconds. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, what was the question? I can't remember the question, sorry.
Culture and ethical collaboration. So how would you encourage?
Yeah, I think, well, I guess my point was, let's try to build, if we know that collaboration is where the juice is, if that's what's happening, and that's how we work as academics. I often think we don't want to hold students to different standards than we hold ourselves. How can we encourage collaboration in ways that are going to that we can be alongside the students with, and we can encourage them to do it in ways that are not only ethical, but are also going to meet some of the goals that we might have for them in terms of how they might interact with people in their future workplaces or whatever. So I think that although collaboration and sort of literacy type or writing type assignments aren't often thought of in the same breath, I'm interested in maybe thinking about how we could explore collaboration that is sanctioned and encouraged, and that's actually part of assignment design. So I don't have any specific examples of that, but I think it's an interesting area to look into. So,
great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your time with us. And thank you very much to all the panelists here, Fiona, Maree. Looking forward to catching up later and speaking with you more. I see you have raised your hand. Is that... Oh.
Sorry, I was just going to respond to what is becoming a more frequent or more common assignment here in Melbourne, at least. Maree and I were both saying that collaboratively developed podcasts are becoming the sort of assignment of the day here in Melbourne. And, that's not a bad thing. Students are talking to each other, positive, tick. They're thinking about the content, positive, tick. They're thinking about the audience, and then they're putting together a spoken response to a question. Often they do it as an interview between the two of them, but they swap the role halfway. Anyway, just putting it out there as what's becoming a common thing here in Melbourne, assessment here.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Ismaeil, and thank you, Joel, and thank you, everybody, and have a nice weekend there.
Thank you, everybody.